Today we begin the story of Napoleon's life. You are born in Ajaccio, Corsica, in 1769, and from the very beginning, everything smells like sea salt, goats, and unfinished arguments. The island itself is a place that seems allergic to boredom, half wild, fiercely proud, and tangled in the awkward middle of Italian heritage and French governance. Your family is technically noble, but it's the kind of nobility that mostly comes with dusty documents and no actual money. So, you grow up not exactly poor, but not exactly princely either. More like, frustrated with the universe and all its silly limitations. You're a small boy, often teased for your accent and size. But oh, you've got that stare. That burning, I will overthrow the world before lunch kind of glare. And emotions? You feel everything at 11 out of 10. Injustice, ambition, loneliness, they all hit like tidal waves. You read Plutarch's Lives like it's a Netflix binge. Alexander the Great becomes your imaginary older brother. You pace the courtyard muttering Latin speeches to imaginary armies while your actual family tries to eat dinner. Then one day, the French crown decides it needs more Corsicans to fill military schools. Your father, Carlo, jumps at the opportunity, pulling every political string available, and before you know it, you're packed off to mainland France at the tender age of 9. Just you, your accent, and that chip on your shoulder that now has its own zip code. You arrive at Brienne-le-Château Military School in the dead of winter. Snow. Uniforms. Discipline. It's cold in every possible way. You're the foreigner. The outsider. You eat alone. You sleep with your fists clenched. But you endure and you learn. You find solace in mathematics, history, and solitude. And above all, you write. Your notebooks overflow with thoughts, observations, secret plans. And slowly, quietly, you begin to rise. Still, even then, there's a soft, whispering ache that lingers. You dream of being loved. Not respected. Not feared. Just seen. You start composing imaginary letters to imaginary women, women who would one day become real, elegant, and utterly out of reach. You visit home only once in those early years, and even then, it feels more like a dream of a place than home itself. Corsica has changed, or maybe you have. Either way, you no longer quite fit. You don't belong fully there, or in France. You're a man between islands. By the time you graduate from Brienne, you've mastered more than battlefield geometry. You've learned how to mask your hunger for affection with a smirk, how to calculate the power in a pause, and how to speak in that measured, sharp tone that makes others listen, whether they want to or not. You're promoted quickly through the ranks, but for all your brilliance with artillery and troop movement, there's a secret you keep tucked inside. You want to be adored. Not by everyone, just one. Just someone who sees past the uniform and the myth in progress. Someone who reads your silences like poetry. At age 16, you're commissioned as a second lieutenant. A teenager with a sword and a future. But you're still awkward at parties, still the kid who feels like the last one picked for a dance. In one of your earliest recorded journal entries you write, "Love is a foolish distraction. It is better to rule than to be ruled by the heart." Cute. Almost convincing. You watch your fellow officers flirt and marry, trading charm for social standing. You, meanwhile, throw yourself into your work, until one night, you scribble a poem so raw and embarrassing, even your future self on St. Helena would wince. And then Paris begins to call. It's a chaotic, revolutionary Paris, where one wrong glance could get you guillotined, and where every corridor reeks of politics, perfume, and danger. You're not wealthy, but you're determined. You rent tiny apartments with terrible plumbing and survive on bread, ambition, and the occasional spoonful of idealism. Still, even amid the unrest, you keep your romantic fantasies alive. It's during this time that you begin forming a blurry image in your mind of her. Not yet Josephine, but the idea of Josephine. She's poised. She's clever. She probably has eyes that make you forget your own name and a voice that could undo all your strategic training. You haven't met her yet, but she's already haunting the margins of your letters. The future Empress is still a stranger, but in your head, you're already writing love notes to the idea of her. Obscure historical detail time. During this period, you become mildly obsessed with a weird self-help theory circulating among intellectuals, that the alignment of your furniture could affect your romantic destiny. So yes, you actually rearrange your writing desk to face southeast for a week. Nothing happens. But the love story, it's coming. And when it does, it will shake you harder than any cannon blast ever could. For now you wait. You plan. You polish your boots and your pride. The island boy with big feelings has made it to the gates of power. But you're still lonely.
Section 2. You leave Brienne with your artillery skills polished and your social skills still under construction. But Paris doesn't care. Paris is too busy setting itself on fire. As the revolution gathers steam, so do you. You're no aristocrat, no powdered fop with a family name carved into a ballroom, just a brilliant, scowling Corsican who knows how to move cannons through mud and make impossible shots feel inevitable. Your gift? You see the geometry of power, not just on the battlefield, but in people, in systems, in cities about to collapse. And yet, beneath all the calculation, there's still a part of you writing letters no one ever sees. To imaginary women, to your dead father, sometimes even to your own reflection. There's always a soft underbelly to your ambition, wrapped tight in idealism and scented candle-level yearning. It's almost adorable. Almost. You're promoted again after the siege of Toulon, where you seize the moment like it owes you rent. You turn disaster into glory with a simple maneuver that no one else sees, because while others are running from smoke, you're already sketching its angles in your head. That victory? It gets you noticed. You're now 24, awkward in court settings, but increasingly magnetic. Not handsome in the classic sense, but something else. Intensity. Command. The kind of presence that makes people stop mid-toast and think, I don't know if I love or fear this guy, but I definitely want to know his star sign. Here's your historically accurate fun fact. At this time, you begin keeping a pocket version of the Sorrows of Young Werther, Goethe's tear-stained ode to unrequited love. You underline passages. Annotate margins. Basically, you're walking battlefield heartbreak waiting for someone to press play. And then something weird happens. You fall in love with the idea of being in love. You write emotional manifestos. You criticize women you haven't met for not being the perfect blend of virtue and charm. You build cathedrals out of expectations, then sigh dramatically when reality doesn't match. But the revolution doesn't wait for dreamers. And neither do your boots. By 1795, you're living in a cramped Paris apartment, hunched over maps, brushing gunpowder off your sleeves, and pretending not to notice that your shoes have holes. The city is a swirling mess of ambition, blood, and perfume. You walk its narrow streets like you're scouting territory, because you are. Every salon, every doorway, every shadowed corner might contain your next opportunity, or your next downfall. That opportunity comes in the form of the 13 Vendemiaire, when royalists try to stage a comeback, and the government calls for someone, anyone, who knows how to deal with a mob. You volunteer. And with a whiff of grape shot, as your PR team will later call it, you turn a royalist uprising into modern art. The government, now properly impressed, and slightly afraid, rewards you. You're promoted again. And here, somewhere between your rising rank and your hunger for meaning, she enters. Her name is Rose Tasher de la Pedrie. But no one really calls her that. Not anymore. She's Josephine. And you are doomed. You meet her at a dinner party. She floats in like a poem written in silk. She's not the idealized vision you built in your head. She's better. Real. Flawed in fascinating ways. 6 years older than you. Widowed. A mother of 2. And impossibly, dazzlingly French. You freeze. For once, you don't have a plan. Josephine smiles like she's already forgiven your intensity. She smells like roses, citrus, and maybe a hint of danger. She doesn't laugh at your awkwardness. She studies it. You try not to fall for her. You lose that battle in under 2 minutes. Later, you'll claim she seduced you. That it was political. Strategic. But between you and me, you melted faster than butter on fresh baguette. You begin writing her letters. Long, feverish, borderline embarrassing letters. Pages and pages of raw, poetic desperation. You call her, my little Josephine, though she's not particularly little nor yours, yet. A quirky but real detail. You once wrote her to say you couldn't function because she hadn't written in 2 days. 2 days. And you weren't even officially dating yet. But she likes your mind. Or maybe your ambition. Or maybe she just finds your storm cloud energy oddly comforting. Either way, she doesn't run. When she agrees to marry you, you're ecstatic and terrified. She's Parisian Grace. You're a Corsican cannonball. But you convince yourself that love will balance the scales. Spoiler, it won't. Still, for now, you allow yourself the fantasy. You walk through Paris at night imagining what her laugh sounds like in private. You memorize her handwriting like it's scripture. You hold her letters to your chest like a wounded boy hiding candy under his pillow. She has lovers. You know. She has secrets. You suspect. But none of it matters, yet. Because she sees you. The version of you even you're afraid to admit exists. Not the strategist. Not the general. Just Napoleon. The boy from the island who wanted to be more. So you dream. And then you pack your bags. Italy is waiting. And Josephine? You tell her you'll return victorious. But already, deep down, you know, she's the only battle you can't win by force.
Section 3. Your boots are muddy. Again. Your coat smells like smoke and wet parchment. Again. And your stomach growls like it's trying to desert the army. But you, Napoleon Bonaparte, are finally where you thrive, on the move, commanding men, chasing glory across hills and through valleys like it's a personal vendetta against geography itself. Italy is a mess. Technically, you're leading the army of Italy, but what you've actually inherited is a threadbare pack of grumbling soldiers with shoes made of hope and leftover curtain fabric. Morale? Somewhere between meh and mutiny. But that's where you shine. You turn despair into firewood. You give speeches that make men forget their hunger. And miraculously, you start winning. One battle. Then another. Soon you're stringing victories like pearls, threading a necklace of triumph across the Alps. But the whole time, your mind is split. Because while your left hand draws up flanking maneuvers and supply routes, your right is writing another letter. To her. Josephine. You write to her with the intensity of 1,000 teenage crushes distilled into a man with 20,000 troops and 0 chill. And your letters? They are not subtle. My waking thoughts are all of thee. You scrawl by candlelight. Your portrait and the memory of last night's intoxication have left no rest to my senses. Okay, big guy. You write like you're composing operas from the front lines. You describe kisses like military tactics, passionate, deliberate, slightly over-engineered. You sign your name as if your pen might explode if it doesn't get to say, yours forever, one more time. Josephine, for her part, responds, occasionally. Vaguely. Warmly. But with the practiced softness of someone who knows what to say without saying too much. She misses you, she says. Life is hard, she says. Her poodle is sick, she says. Wait. A sick poodle? Yes. In one letter, she describes her concern for Fortune, her lapdog, in more detail than she gives your military campaign. You're out here turning empires into confetti, and she's preoccupied with her dog's indigestion. Still, you're in deep. And here's the thing, when you're not in love, you're focused. Deadly. Brilliant. But when you're in love? Oh, you're dramatic. Obsessive. You pace the tent like a caffeinated poet. You snap at aides over minor spelling errors. You press your lips to the parchment after signing your name, so she'll know you mean it. Meanwhile, the campaign blazes on. You outwit Austrian generals, storm fortresses, and shake hands with kings who secretly hate your guts. You negotiate treaties like poker games and come out with the whole pot. The French government sends medals. Parisians send wine. And Josephine? Josephine sends silence. Or worse, letters that smell like perfume and indifference. Rumors reach you like frost under the tent flap. She's attending salons again. Hosting soirees. Maybe even entertaining admirers. You try to dismiss it. You try to believe she's just lonely. That Paris is full of gossips. That love, real love, can weather distance. But the doubt creeps in. You send more letters. Longer letters. You start begging. Not for affection, but for attention. You're Napoleon Bonaparte, master of armies, and you're begging for a text back. Obscure but true detail. One night during the Italian campaign, you order a courier to ride through enemy territory just to deliver a single rose and one of your letters to Josephine. The rose doesn't make it. The courier does. Barely. You're told Josephine appreciated the sentiment. You're also told she was at the opera the night it arrived. Still, you keep going. Because war is simpler than love. You understand supply chains. You don't understand why she hasn't written in 4 days. You can predict enemy movements. You can't predict if she's reading your letters with a smile or a sigh. But despite your unraveling emotions, Italy bows before you. The campaign is a masterpiece. You redraw the map like it's your personal sketchbook. You turn shattered battalions into marching bands of legend. France, in its infinite chaos, suddenly sees you as something new, a hero. Not just a general. A symbol. A storm they can aim. But you? You just want her. So, when you finally return to Paris in 1797, covered in glory, adored by crowds, trailed by 100 cheering officers, you head straight for Josephine's house. And she's not there. She's at her country estate. You blink. You clench your jaw. You nod like it's fine. Like everything is fine. Then you storm back into your carriage, spin your hat dramatically, a Napoleon classic, and go after her. What follows is an awkward, private confrontation full of hurt feelings, muffled tears, and vague denials. She insists she was faithful. You don't believe her. You don't know what to believe anymore. But you forgive her anyway. Because you need her. Because you're in too deep. Because for all your tactical genius, you've lost the ability to retreat. And maybe, just maybe, a part of you knows, no one will ever haunt you like she does.
You're standing in a room that smells like orange blossoms and old money. Velvet chairs. gilded mirrors, a piano no one plays, but everyone polishes. And her, Josephine, leaning against the window frame, her silhouette framed by late afternoon Parisian light that somehow conspires to make her look like she stepped out of a painting and into your emotional roller coaster. You don't know whether to kiss her or interrogate her. She says your name with that soft lilt, Bonaparte, like it's both a caress and a joke. She's always calling you that, even now that you're married. Never Napoleon. Never anything too personal. Always just Bonaparte. It makes you feel powerful and distant, like you're her favorite myth. You married her in a small civil ceremony in March of 1796, just 2 days before marching off to command the army of Italy. Your sword was polished, your uniform pressed, and your nerves frayed like a violin string. She was fashionably late to the wedding. You pretended not to notice. You lied about your age on the certificate. She subtracted a couple years from hers, too. It was, in many ways, a perfect French marriage, equal parts romance and revisionism. And now, back from war, flush with medals and reputation, you expect to slide into the life of a couple reunited. But instead, you find yourself navigating her world like it's a foreign campaign, one where charm replaces tactics, and you're never quite sure who's telling the truth. She kisses your cheek. Her perfume wraps around your mind like ivy. You want to melt, but you also want to scream. Because you've read the letters, heard the whispers. There were men, more than one. Officers, poets, even a young cavalryman with an unfortunate mustache. You confront her. It's not a shouting match. It's worse. It's calm, controlled, passive-aggressive in the way only two people who know each other's pressure points can be. She denies nothing outright. She weaves half-truths with practiced grace, and you, who can decipher enemy troop movements in a snowstorm, can't find your way through her gaze. So you do what you always do. You retreat into control. You begin restructuring Paris from the inside out. You reorganize government offices like chess pieces. You redesign maps. You plan your Egyptian campaign. You attend functions, give orders, accept applause. But you still write her. Even from Cairo, even from Alexandria, surrounded by dust and stars and ancient ruins, you write. You imagine her reclining at Malmaison, tending to roses, laughing at some joke in a salon full of sycophants. And you write as if your words can tether her to you across continents. Come to me, you plead. I am tired of glory. I want only your smile. Back in France, though, she's growing restless. The power dynamic is shifting. You are becoming more than just her passionate husband. You are becoming Napoleon the myth, the general of a nation, the star of every room you enter. And she's struggling to keep up. She decorates her estate with exotic plants, art, and imported birds. She becomes a patron of taste, a muse of modernity. But none of it stops the rumors. And none of it stops you from loving her with a kind of desperation that makes statues look away. Here's a delightfully weird detail. When Josephine moves into Malmaison, she installs a heated orangery so she can grow tropical flowers year-round, including, of course, roses. You would later joke, with only a bit of venom, that she had better luck growing plants than loyalty. Your letters shift in tone. Less poetry, more suspicion. Less, I love you, and more, why haven't you answered? You begin signing them with fewer flourishes. The kisses disappear. The desperation stays. And yet, when you return again, Weathered from Egypt and political upheaval, you find her waiting in the doorway, smiling, tired, older, still magnetic in a way that makes your spine straighten just to impress her. You're cold to her at first, distant. You toss off lines meant to sting, to punish, to remind her that you've heard things. But she plays the long game. She's warmer, gentler. She doesn't argue. She unfolds. She never begs. She simply remains. And once again, she wins. You tell yourself it's temporary, that one day you'll be strong enough to let go, that your ambition is your true love, that Josephine is a luxury you can no longer afford. But that's the lie you cling to like armor. Because when the curtains fall and the public's gone, you still reach for her in the dark. You still dream of her perfume on your collar. You still call out her name in your sleep. You may command empires, but in the quiet corners of your heart, she commands you. The Alps are behind you, and northern Italy is beneath your feet. You've outwitted the Austrians, humiliated monarchs, and redrawn borders as if cartography were your weekend hobby. The world now knows your name, or at the very least, how to pronounce it with a mixture of awe and mild anxiety. But all the medals, maps, and momentary applause can't quiet the letter-shaped hole inside your chest. Because Josephine isn't writing back. Not really. Not in the way you need. You still write to her obsessively. At first daily, then twice a day. Your dispatches to the directory are succinct, tactical, decorated with terms like encirclement and supply line. But your letters to her? They're flooded with metaphors, exclamations, and a curious amount of punctuation. Your quill practically sobs. Not a letter from you. You write in a state of high dramatic crisis. I am distressed beyond measure. You don't love me anymore. You're fighting an entire continent, but it's her silence that defeats you. She's back in Paris, tending to her salons and rose gardens, possibly indulging in flirtations that send your mind racing like a cavalry charge gone rogue. You picture her smiling at someone else, her delicate laugh tucked inside another man's memory. The thought sears more than can fire. So you double down on your devotion. You send over 200 letters during your Italian campaign alone. That's right, 200. Most of them arrive damp, smudged, and borderline unreadable, but you don't care. They carry the weight of your soul, and that's what matters. Meanwhile, Josephine replies just often enough to keep your heart chained and your rationality buried under a pile of embroidered stationery. Her letters are short, polite, occasionally affectionate, just not the wild confessions you crave. You're pouring yourself into this relationship like it's a battlefield, and she's out there practicing elegant emotional disengagement like a Parisian art form. To your credit, you try to stay composed, but when your courier reports that Josephine was seen riding through the Bois de Boulogne with another man, you practically explode. You write, "You are cruel and unfeeling. You no longer love me. You've forgotten your husband who gave you his all, his victories, his name, his future." And then, just 2 sentences later, you're back to, "I love you more than ever." So that's going well. Let's insert a quirky historical nugget here. One of your letters was so steamy, so poetically unhinged, that it's still censored in most school textbooks. In it you describe, in excruciating detail, how much you miss her body, her breath, even her voice. At one point, you essentially threatened to teleport through time and space just to see her ankle. Romantic? Slightly. Unhinged? Definitely. Still, you're winning wars. And with every fortress that falls, every general that surrenders, You feel like you're building a future she'll finally want to come home to. So when you receive word that she may have taken a lover, again, your world narrows into something sharp and quiet. You confront her in your next letter. You try to be dignified. Fail. You try to be logical. Fail harder. What emerges is a hybrid of accusation, longing, and what can only be described as early French emocore. And yet, despite everything, you don't stop loving her. Because for all her aloofness, all her maddening grace and indecipherable motives, Josephine is still your compass. You see her face when you close your eyes. You hear her laughter in the quiet before battles. You fight harder just to return to her. When you're offered the chance to negotiate the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797, you accept partly for France, and partly because it means you'll get to go home. To her. You return triumphant, half expecting a parade and a passionate embrace. Instead, you get lukewarm kisses and a faintly distracted, "Welcome back, Bonaparte." You stand there, fresh from conquest, medals still clinking, and she's more concerned with her latest interior decorating project than your geopolitical triumph. And yet, you forgive her. Again. Because love, for you, isn't about equality. It's not even about reciprocation. It's about obsession. About conquest of a different kind. And in your most vulnerable moments, you know it's not her you love. It's the part of yourself that comes alive only when you're chasing her. So you stay. You commission portraits of her. You plan your next campaign. You hold her hand at parties, like everything's fine. You even buy her a diamond necklace that could fund an entire battalion for 3 years. But late at night, in the quiet of your study, you still open those faded letters. Still trace the loops of her handwriting with your fingertip. Still wonder, what would it feel like to finally be enough? You're emperor now. The crown isn't placed on your head by the Pope. You take it, literally, from the Pope's hands. And you crown yourself, because if history's going to remember anything, it might as well be that you didn't wait for permission. The ceremony is opulent. Gold, velvet, choirs echoing in Notre Dame. You look like a man sculpted by ambition and tailored by destiny. Beside you stands Josephine, adorned in silk and diamonds, looking every inch the empress. From the outside, it's a fairy tale, two lovers rising to unimaginable heights together. But you know better. Because in the palace halls and mirrored corridors of power, love begins to curdle. The truth is, marriage never softened the war inside you. And power? Power made you worse. You begin to suspect everything, the loyalty of your ministers, the intentions of foreign diplomats, the glances Josephine gives to men with good cheekbones and suspicious wit. You monitor her correspondence. You question her ladies-in-waiting. You stop pretending not to care when someone mentions her past lovers. Jealousy is a bitter drink, and you guzzle it like wine. She, on the other hand, grows quieter. Not colder, just more composed. She knows how to live in luxury, how to survive proximity to your rage. She has her own suite now, her own rooms. You sleep apart more often than together. At dinners you perform, the perfect imperial couple. Her laughter is airy and practiced. Your smile is measured in millimeters. The wine flows, the musicians play, and beneath the table your foot taps like a ticking bomb. Still, there are good moments. You walk with her through the gardens of Malmaison. You argue about roses. She insists red ones are too gaudy. You accuse her of favoring pink because they match her dresses. She smirks. You both laugh. For a moment, it's just you and her. No crowns, no rumors, no expectations. But the peace never lasts. Because love, once frayed, doesn't mend with gold thread. It snags. It pulls. And eventually, it rips. Josephine is unable to give you an heir. It's not her fault. You know this. But the silence in the nursery echoes louder each year. Courtiers whisper. Ministers grow bold. France needs succession, and you need legitimacy. And slowly, that need begins to outweigh your loyalty. You try to ignore it. You pretend the empire is enough. But it isn't. So you do what you always do. You build a new future. You begin to distance yourself emotionally. You take other women to bed. Quietly at first, then less so. You justify it as politics, as practicality. But a part of you just wants to feel wanted again. To reclaim some version of yourself untouched by doubt. Josephine finds out. Of course she does. She always does. But she doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She simply retreats. And that, somehow, hurts more. You'd almost prefer a fight. Something loud and operatic. But she only withdraws behind her fan, her shawl, her measured tone. Even the walls seem to sigh at night. Let's pause for a moment to sprinkle in a slightly ridiculous historical detail. At the height of your power, you once had a special cologne commissioned using rosemary, neroli, and alcohol. You called it Eau de Cologne Imperiale. You wore it obsessively. Josephine hated the smell but never told you. She just made sure the windows were always open. That's love, in its own strange way. But back to the unraveling. Eventually, you begin considering divorce. Not because you no longer love her, but because love has become a liability. You need a son. France demands a dynasty. And you, who once scrawled poetry across battle maps, now sit down with legal advisors to dismantle the only intimacy you've ever truly known. You don't tell her immediately. You wait. You pace. You rehearse. And when you do finally speak the words, she goes still, like glass before it shatters. She doesn't plead. She doesn't protest. She simply says, "If it must be, it must be." The next weeks are unbearable. You draft public statements. She prepares farewell letters. The palace becomes a museum of ghosts. And then, on a gray December day in 1809, you officially dissolve your marriage. You call it a sacrifice for France. She nods and smiles for the cameras. But inside, you both know the truth. You still love her. You always will. Because no matter how many thrones you sit on, no matter how many crowns you wear, there's only one person who ever saw you as more than an empire. And now she's gone. The palace is too quiet. After the divorce, you try to convince yourself that it's a relief. No more emotional acrobatics, no more carefully composed letters, no more suspicious glances at every man who made her laugh a little too long. The burden is lifted. But love doesn't leave with the paperwork. It lingers in the silk drapes, in the scent of her perfume that still clings to the hallways, in the space beside you in bed where she used to hum nonsense melodies just before falling asleep. You marry again, of course. The Austrian Archduchess, Marie-Louise. She's 19. Dutiful. Blonde. Fertile. A diplomatic triumph wrapped in tulle and foreign vowels. You hardly know her when you say, "I do," but she bears you a son, a real, live, healthy air. The thing you told yourself you needed more than anything. And yet, you still dream of Josephine. Not every night, but often enough that it becomes a kind of ritual. You wake up before dawn, whispering her name into the dark like it might answer back. You write to her, even after the divorce. Polite notes, check-ins. You send gifts, flowers from your travels, trinkets from foreign courts. She accepts them with grace, never asking for more. She always signs simply, Josephine. You know she'll never stop loving you. But she also knows something you've always resisted. Sometimes, love is not enough. And that realization, it aches. She retreats to Malmaison, her beloved estate just outside Paris. You gave it to her as a gift early in your marriage. She fills it with roses, swans, exotic birds. Her garden becomes a legend in itself, a sanctuary of elegance and melancholy. You visit only once after the divorce. It's awkward. You try to smile. She does too. She asks after your health. You tell her about the boy, Napoleon II, the King of Rome, and for a moment, she smiles like she's proud of you. Like none of the pain ever happened. But you both know better. She keeps portraits of you in her chambers. You keep a lock of her hair in a small box, tucked deep within your belongings, far from your advisor's eyes. You never speak of it, but you never throw it away. Quirky, but true, Josephine once asked her servants to plant a single olive tree in a corner of the garden. A symbol of peace, she said. You later ask if it still grows there. She replies, it does, and it is stubborn. Just like her. Meanwhile, you continue conquering, or at least trying to. But Europe is getting tired of your brilliance. Armies rise against you like tides. You feel it slipping, the magic, the invincibility, the myth. And when things get hard, you think of her. Not your new empress. Not your son. Her. You imagine her in that garden, surrounded by roses she named herself, talking to parakeets like old friends. You picture her wearing the white muslin dress she always loved, with the ribbon tied just so. You wonder if she still reads your old letters. You hope she does. Because in the end, Josephine was never just a wife. She was your mirror, the one person who reflected back all your contradictions. She saw the storm and stayed anyway. Until you pushed her away. Now, the empire is cracking. Alliances shift. Enemies close in. You put on the uniform every morning, but it feels heavier. Less like armor, more like penance. You write one last letter to her. This time, it's not passionate or poetic. It's simple, honest. You thank her for loving you, for forgiving you, for enduring the impossible. She never writes back. Not because she's angry, but because she's dying. Illness comes quickly. A chill, a fever, then worse. And though she's surrounded by family and loyal friends, her thoughts drift to you. In her final moments, she keeps one of your letters beneath her pillow. One from Italy, back when love was young and unbroken. You don't make it in time to say goodbye. When the news reaches you, something inside you breaks in a way that battlefields never could. You stand at your window for hours. You don't speak. You don't eat. When your valet dares to knock, you simply say, "Leave me. She is gone." You send a wreath of roses to Malmaison. You write a eulogy that is never read aloud. And that lock of hair? You move it to your breast pocket, close to your heart, where she always lived. The birds at Malmaison keep singing, even after she's gone. You find that strangely offensive. Josephine has been dead for weeks, and yet her estate remains filled with the sounds of life. Swan wings slicing through water, peacocks strutting with indifference, the rustle of rose bushes in the afternoon wind. The olive tree still stands, gnarled and quietly defiant. Even the air seems to remember her perfume, as though the walls of Malmaison have refused to forget. You visit again, in secret. No fanfare. No officers. Just you and a small retinue, slipping past the gates at dusk like you're returning to a home that no longer wants you. The staff recognizes you instantly. Some bow. Others look away. A few cry. You walk the halls slowly, your boots echoing against parquet floors that once felt warm under her slippers. You pause by her favorite window, the one that faced the rose garden. Her writing desk is still there, quills in place, paper untouched. You run your fingers over the surface. Dust trails behind them like ghosts. In the garden, you sit on the iron bench where she used to read. You don't say much. You just watch the wind move through the flowers. You think about all the letters you sent. The one she kept. The one she kissed. The one she probably rolled her eyes at. And you wonder if any of them were enough. Because now, even with a son and a crumbling empire, you're starting to understand something. Love isn't about conquest. It's not about overwhelming someone with words or deeds. It's about presence. About staying, even when you could leave. About showing up, not just winning over. And Josephine? She stayed, in her own way. Even when you were impossible. Especially when you were impossible. Back in Paris, the pressure mounts. The coalition armies are closing in. Your allies are bailing like rats from a listing ship. Your son is too young to lead, and your new wife is conveniently out of reach. Austria is whispering behind your back. The Senate is restless. You try to hold it together. You make speeches. You shuffle generals. You reread your own war reports as if they'll inspire you the way they once did. But nothing sticks. You find yourself wandering palace corridors at night, alone. Servants say they hear you talking to no one, that you mutter her name under your breath, that sometimes, when you pass the portrait of her in your study, you reach out as if to straighten a wrinkle that isn't there. One evening, you open her final letter. It's short, simple, kind. Be strong, my Bonaparte. France needs you. I believe in you. Always. You fold it gently. You don't cry. You've cried enough. Instead, you walk out into the palace garden, still wearing your uniform, and you stare up at the stars. Somewhere out there, you imagine, she's laughing at you, teasing you, still calling you Bonaparte, because even in death, she refuses to give you the last word. And honestly, you'd give anything to hear her say it again. Let's toss in a peculiar historical footnote here. You once commissioned a scented handkerchief embroidered with her initials to carry during battle. You claimed it was for good fortune. Your generals pretended not to notice when you pressed it to your lips after bad news. Now, the scent is gone, but the habit remains. In 1814, the walls finally close in. Paris falls. You abdicate the throne. Your enemies try to act civil about it, like it's just politics. You smile politely and imagine what Josephine would have said, Probably something dry like, "Well, Bonaparte, at least now you have time for those roses." They exile you to Elba, a tiny speck in the Mediterranean. You take books, maps, a few loyal officers, and one small box of personal effects tucked beneath layers of folded uniforms. Inside it, her miniature portrait, a locket of hair, and a handful of her letters, creased, faded, sacred. At night, you read them by lamplight. You mouth the words. You rewrite replies in your head, knowing you'll never send them. The sea laps against the shore. The stars glint overhead. And still, the birds sing at Malmaison. Elba is not the worst prison. It's just the loneliest one. The island gives you a villa, a title, a tiny retinue of guards, who look at you with the unease one reserves for lions in cages. You stroll its rocky paths like a ghost in a parade uniform, nodding at fishermen and pretending to enjoy olives. You host dinners no one really wants to attend. You feign interest in local politics. You pretend not to miss the thunder. But most of all, you miss her. Because now that it's over, truly over, you finally admit what you never could when she was alive. You didn't just love Josephine. You needed her. You needed someone to see past the medals, the maps, the marble busts, and still call you Bonaparte, like it was a private joke, not a crown. You carry her memory with the reverence of a cathedral, and it haunts you. Not painfully, not dramatically, just steadily, like a quiet tide that never quite recedes. You walk the shoreline alone most nights. Sometimes you speak aloud to her. Sometimes you scold yourself for doing it. Once, when the waves are particularly rough, you shout at the sea. It doesn't answer, but you imagine her voice in the foam. And then, like a thunderclap wrapped in velvet, you escape. Elba was never going to hold you, not really. You're Napoleon Bonaparte. You eat the impossible for breakfast. So you board a ship, return to France, and spark the 100 Days like it's your final symphony. The people still cheer. Some. Enough. Your name still echoes off walls. Your shadow still fits the throne. And for a brief, glorious moment, you're back. But she isn't. You see it everywhere. At the Tuileries, where she once rearranged the drawing rooms. In the gardens, where she used to walk in the mornings. Even in your generals' faces, who remember how she used to soothe your temper with a look. France rises around you like a sandcastle rebuilt, and you pretend it doesn't feel hollow. You try to focus, to rally, but your heart's a little slower now. Your gaze lingers longer. You start forgetting names. You no longer dream of victory. You dream of her reading one of your old letters and smiling. And then, Waterloo. Not a battle. A reckoning. You try everything. Maneuvers, speeches, charm, fire. You summon the version of yourself that once turned kings to mist. But the world has changed. Or maybe you have. The cannons don't sound the same. The ground doesn't respond to your boots. And somewhere between the mud and the smoke and the final, awful silence, you realize you're not chasing glory anymore. You're chasing a memory. You're chasing her. They send you farther away, St. Helena, a rock in the South Atlantic, as far from roses and music as a man can be. Your cabin is damp. The island is windswept and brooding. You fall often. Your skin grays. Your hands tremble. Your boots gather dust. But still, you keep her portrait on your bedside table. You talk to her every evening before sleep. Sometimes you thank her. Sometimes you apologize. Sometimes you tell her about your son, about how you hope he's kind, even if he never rules. You imagine her listening, always listening. Here's a strange, true detail. You once asked your valet to read her letters aloud when your eyesight began to fade. You didn't need the words. You had them memorized. But the sound, the rhythm of her, was the closest thing to warmth in that cold, distant place. You begin dictating your memoirs. You downplay the romance, of course. History doesn't like emotion. It prefers dates, treaties, troop movements. But in the margins, where no one sees, you write her name. Josephine. Sometimes just her name. By 1821, your body is failing. The doctors call it cancer, or ulcers, or exhaustion. They argue over the words. You don't bother correcting them. You just wait. And on your final night, you whisper something to the room. France Army, head of the army. Josephine. They record it dutifully, as if they understand. They don't. But we do. The candle beside your bed flickers. Not dramatically, no cinematic farewell. Just a quiet, fluttering dance against the damp air of St. Helena. A light unsure of itself. Much like you, in this final moment. Your breaths come shallow, measured, like a man still pacing the battlefield, only now the enemy is time itself. Outside, the Atlantic winds beat against the windows like impatient messengers. But there are no dispatches left to read, no maps left to unfold. Just this small room, your worn hands, and her face in a frame. Josephine. She looks at you still, forever young, forever elegant, forever slightly amused by your intensity. You kept this portrait closer than your sword, closer than your generals, closer than anyone knew. You reach for it now, though your fingers barely cooperate. And somewhere in your mind, you're walking the halls of Malmaison again. She's ahead of you, in that soft muslin gown, turning briefly to say, "You're late again, Bonaparte." Her voice is sunlight filtered through trees. You try to speak. Your mouth moves. No sound. No matter. Because you remember.